Hi, my name is Ruth Marx, and I'd like to talk to you about how me learning about the Scopes trial of 1925 started to transform me as a teacher. So I learnt about the Scopes trial when I was teaching a unit on fundamentalism to some Year 13 students, and I hadn't got a textbook or any resources for this, so I had to do a lot of reading to get my head around it before I was teaching it, which I loved. But part of that meant that I came across this thing called the Scopes trial. It kept cropping up as something that was critical, crucial, significant for the nature, development and history of fundamentalism. And particularly it kept coming up in the writings of Karen Armstrong, who I absolutely loved reading what she wrote about it. And so the Scopes trial happened in 1925 in America, in the state of Tennessee, where there had been a law brought in to say that teachers could not teach about evolution in the classroom due to the kind of threat or the fear of the threat of ideas about evolution challenging the traditional understanding of the creation account in the book of Genesis in the Bible. And one teacher had agreed to sort of test this case. So a few months after the law came in, he agreed to be a test case. He was supported by the ACLU to teach and then have this tested and go to court about whether he'd taught evolution or not. And it did go to court in July of 1925, 100 years ago. So if he broke the law about teaching evolution in the classroom, why did it become such an important and massive case? Well, it was pitted as more than just that. It wasn't just about had he taught evolution. It was really about, was it right for the law to be brought in that you couldn't teach evolution? And even bigger than that, like bigger questions around the battle between religion and science, that so-called battle that we often talk about in religious studies. And so not only was it important for the people in that town, but it became kind of a worldwide sensation. It was the first court case to be broadcast live on the radio, which is a bit like streaming it live, so people could tune in onto this battleground of whether religion or science was going to win. And people tuned in from all over the world. People turned up from all over the world, came into the court case in this baking hot July in Tennessee. The courtroom was too full and they had to move it outside because so many people had descended on this town to really decide whether religion or science was going to win. And it kept being pitted as this battle between the two. Not only that, but two big names were the lawyers in this case. And so there really was this kind of celebrity buzz as well around which of the lawyers was going to win. So the whole world was pretty much watching this little town and this group of people to see what was going to win in the battle. He was found guilty because he had taught about evolution and he was fined, but it was kind of a bit of an empty victory in a way because whilst he was found guilty there in the appeals court, it was overturned. And scholars like Karen Armstrong have said, it's as if the prosecutors won the case but lost the overall argument. Karen Armstrong then writes about how those Christian communities felt this sort of blow from culture, from the media, and kind of retreat back into themselves slightly. And we have this sense of being an embattled minority. We are under attack and we need to kind of hunker down and protect our own. And that made so much sense to me for understanding my own history, my own faith background, but also understanding world events, even today, 100 years later, that are going on, and that kind of psyche around that sense of modernity and that battle between religion and science. Well, that's not really what the case was about. Essentially, it was just asking, had this teacher taught evolution or not? It had become much bigger than that. So how did this transform me as an RE teacher then? Well, firstly, it helped me to have a greater empathy and compassion and understanding of some worldviews that I perhaps hadn't really fully understood before, the psyche behind them and how they'd kind of ended up in that way and some of the things that had caused them to have these different mentalities, and how within one organised worldview or religious tradition you can have these different approaches to religion, and what are some of the things that have led to that? What are some of the factors that have led to these different approaches to religion, and then how that has then filtered out into different forms of it. So it really helped me to understand and have a much more compassionate and understanding approach to worldviews that were very different to my own. Secondly, the case itself was pitted as religion versus science, which is what The Simpsons parody does and other films have done, but actually in the case itself, which you can find online, because there's some amazing US historians who've done this, you can see all the different people who actually took part, and there was a range of people on each side. So take, for example, on the defence side, you would think it was all the people who didn't believe in God saying we have to teach about evolution, but actually there were many religious people on that side, so it wasn't religion versus science. So you even had a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, who spoke about how the original Hebrew that the story of creation was written in has the word yom, and that could be translated as day or period of time. So is it a translation of the Bible that people are taking as the literal truth of God? And that, for me, just sort of sent off sparks around how we can teach about this in the classroom and using those different lenses, looking at the story. And with my students, they could see that there is a range of different views. It's not this like black and white battle for and against, or religion versus science, but you can have a range of opinions and a range of perspectives on issues even such as this. And so whilst in religious education we may end up often doing this kind of for and against, agree and disagree, kind of binary debates around things, even this court case which was shown as the battle between religion and science, actually it was more nuanced than that. It's a reminder to me of how we can have these nuanced discussions and different approaches to debates such as this. And finally, it helped me understand more fully the power of a real, genuine historical story for my students to kind of get into as they were learning about this topic. And so not only just retelling the story, but the students literally reenacting it. So I made character cards of not only Scopes and the lawyers and the judge, but also the different people who gave evidence, who they were and the kind of evidence they gave. Thank you to some amazing historians in America who have kind of documented all of this. And so the students would each have a character card where they could get into the worldview of that person and then present the view of that person as part of the court case. And I would literally bring in a monkey teddy bear in to be the monkey in the room, which is what happened in the genuine court case. A monkey was brought in, dressed up like a person, although that's obviously a misconception that we evolved from monkeys. This is the way it was pitted in the court case, and still today that's a big misconception a lot of my students tend to come to the classroom with around the theory of evolution. So this is an opportunity to discuss it and unpack it, and students remember that for years later. So I've had students who I talk about the Scopes trial again once I got them in year 13 or year 12, who remember that we reenacted that together in year 7 or 8, and this has stayed with them as a memory because of them reenacting it and really being able to hook onto that real, genuine story. It was just such a crucial moment in the development of religion and worldviews that when I learnt about it, I couldn't help but have it transform my own teaching as an RE teacher. So for me, when I learnt about the Scopes trial, it started to transform me in the way I thought about myself as a teacher. It started to transform me in the way that I thought about the religions and worldviews I was teaching about, but it also started to transform the way I thought about my students who I was teaching. I'd love to know if there's anything that has transformed you as a teacher in the same way the Scopes trial has for me.